Spiring Cross, Johnson Reef, including Mischief Reef. Woody Island is already existing. So this series of circles are circles of control that will give China full control of the South China Sea. But of course, the US Navy said that we are staying in the South China Sea. And here are the countries that are very interested in what's happening there. Malabar exercise. India entered the picture by participating in the Malabar exercise. What is the Malabar exercise? This is an naval exercise near Okinawa, participated in by the United States, by India, and by Japan. And in the case of India, India mentioned not only deployment, they're talking of operational deployment. In other words, India was saying that they're very interested in South China Sea, and they would like to stay there for quite a long time, as reported in Times of India. The naval exercise of China, China responded even before the July 12 announcement of the Arbitral Tribunal by holding a live fire drill in the South China Sea as a strong message directed at the other powers in the area. And of course, this is a plus point. And here's what we were able to secure. This is from the intelligence community. The intelligence community is saying that this is what China, if they would be unimpeded, are planning to do in Scarborough Shoal. They're also planning to construct around Scarborough Shoal. These are rocks here. They're not going to touch the lagoon here. And they're planning to have a runway here, airport management, some buildings, even some tourism area. And there's a natural channel here. Maybe they'll dredge a little bit to make the lagoon a little deeper. How big is the lagoon? The lagoon is not small. A lot of people are saying, malit na bagay lang yan. The lagoon inside Scarborough Shoal is about 150 square kilometers, almost the size of Quezon City. Quezon City is 160 square kilometers, so you can imagine what they can do inside the lagoon. This is even going to be bigger than Subic Bay or Pearl Harbor if they can succeed in militarizing this. And the US, through a retired US admiral, he used to be the commander of the Pacific Command, said that Scarborough Shoal, if militarized by China, may turn out to be a red line, that the US could go to war with China over Scarborough Shoal. This is the security assessment of a retired US Navy admiral who used to be commander. That some people are thinking that there might be inevitable war between the US and China. China, US could be heading for a naval showdown. There's a task force of the aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan. The statement of, now, we come to the statement of, again, there have been some amendments to the statements of President Duterte. He said, this was already in August, about a month after the decision with the tribunal. With regard to the West Philippine Sea, otherwise known as the South China Sea, we strongly affirm and respect the outcome of the case of the Permanent Court of Arbitration as an important contribution. So at that point, the President was recognizing the importance of the ruling and insisting that China must recognize the South China Sea ruling. And of course, I welcome this. In fact, Secretary, as I said, China will be the loser if it does not recognize an international court ruling in its territorial claims in the South China Sea. And Secretary Kerry came over and said that the Philippines and China must talk, but based on international law, meaning based on the ruling of the Permanent Court of Arbitration. President Duterte sent a message to the Chinese ambassador that talks should be based on the Hague ruling. This was August 26. And there are no bilateral talks yet with China over the West Philippine Sea because originally a bilateral talk would be considered a no-no. That was the position in the previous administration. That is the position that I favor also, because we cannot have a bilateral talk with a country that is maybe 100 times bigger than us, militarily and economic-wise. And I was praying that this is going to be a policy written on stone, that it will not change, that there will be no bilateral talks. 2 red lines were announced. I mentioned this already. The red line would be a warning to Japan, because Japan also indicated an interest in patrolling the South China Sea, because to them, their security also depends very critically on the security of the South China Sea. Any breach there is going to affect their national security. But Japan was trying to bully, China was trying to bully Japan by saying that is going to be a red line. If Japan will patrol the South China Sea, we, China, considers that a red line. The Philippines was also concerned about some Chinese boats near the South China, near the Scarborough Shoal. So now we after FBR's talk with his counterparts in Hong Kong, with the Chinese counterparts, some former ambassadors, military officials, generals, conducted a track-to diplomacy with China. And I think all of you are familiar with track-to. This is not the official diplomatic route, but the non-diplomats can talk with their counterparts in China also on a track-to basis to pave the way for a more formal discussion. Group of retired ambassadors. Now, what about the Philippines-US alliance? Because things changed all of a sudden when in September 13, 2 months after the decision of the Arbitral Tribunal, President Duterte signaled a shift in the US-Philippines military alliance by saying that he wants to acquire defense equipment not anymore from the US, but considering Russia and China. He was signaling that he's looking at suppliers in China, and he said that the US Navy should not anymore patrol the South China Sea, or the Philippines should not anymore patrol alongside the US Navy, because this is going to upset China. That was a statement. And then President Duterte started talking of deals with China and Russia to be in the pipeline. The Philippines need, but at the same time, President Duterte also said that the Philippines needs the US in zero with China. So here we're looking at some conflicting signals, very confusing signals if you ask me. And then he again announced a few days after that he wants to forge closer, this is September 26 already, to forge closer ties with China and Russia. And he said, this was a few days after, he said that the Philippine-US War Games will be the last for this year, 2016. But this was later amended to be 2017 instead of this year, because I guess of the representation coming from the Department of National Defense and the Armed Forces of the Philippines. And of course, things culminated with the visit of the President to China, and I think we're all familiar with this, that here, this was where he said that the Philippines is going to align with China, and the US has lost. And he used the word separation, which of course bothered a lot of people, but the following day they clarified that, saying that it's not really separation, but more of, it's not really severance of ties, but navigating through an independent foreign policy, not dependent on the US policy. And he came back with the largest, amounting to about $24 billion worth of several infrastructure projects. Cooperation. Now, there's a major stumbling block for whatever agreement there will be, because there's some kind of an impasse statement. China wants us to recognize that they have sovereignty over the disputed territories. But in our case, we are insisting that we should respect the ruling of the Arbitral Tribunal. And just to cite an example, of an independent foreign policy. Here's Indonesia. Indonesia has a GDP which is about 3 times our GDP. The GDP is close to $1 billion. Almost $1 trillion. Our GDP is about $300 billion. They have a much bigger military than our military. They're farther away from China, but China is starting to intrude into their Natuna Sea. What is the response of Indonesia in spite of their bigness? They went to the United States. They sent a delegation to the United States asking the U.S. to help them in financing the construction or upgrading of a naval base in the South China Sea fronting the Natuna Sea. So this is something that we can look at by way of how to force our foreign policy. We can learn from Indonesia that in spite of their bigness, they're a member of their G20, a GDP of more than 800 billion compared to our less than 300 billion, but they still look at the US in terms of assistance. They send a delegation of flag officers there. Now, what about the US contribution to the Philippine economy? So here we are now looking at, we have $24 billion coming from China and maybe more assistance. What about the existing benefits that we're getting from the United States? Of course, there's the $2 million aid that China pledged as a result of Typhoon Yolanda. The U.S. initially pledged $20 billion and went up to $90 billion. ODA amounting to $3.19 billion in 2014. 36% of them grants. In other words, we do not have to pay them. 5.2% from Japan. Only 0.18% of ODA coming from China. Grants 200 times more than China. ODA, this excludes the military assistance we're getting from the US, which is not much. Merchandise export market of 12.5 as far as Japan is concerned. 8.6 billion for the USA, China 7.3 billion. So there's a lot of economic matters at stake in our relationship with the United States that could be jeopardized if we make that drastic swing towards China at the expense of an already existing relationship. Of course, my point here is that we can develop a very good relationship with China without sacrificing an already established relationship with the United States. In terms of popularity, they ran a survey. This is a survey conducted by Pew Research on how popular or unpopular the United States is worldwide. It was a big surprise that Filipinos consider the United States on a more favorable basis than the Americans themselves. We rate the US at 92% favorable rating. South Korea rates the US at 84%, and very surprisingly, Vietnam, in spite of their 11-year war with the US, rates the US at 77%. 77% of the Vietnamese favor the United States. India's rating, as far as they see the US concerned, went up from 55% to 75% as of today. 84% for South Korea, Indonesia at 62%, Japan at 68%, but America has low ratings in China, expectedly 44%. Jordan is a very low, 13%. Lebanon 39%, Palestine 26%, Venezuela 51%, and very high in most of the African countries, above 70%. Now, in terms of how the Philippines look at the various countries, in the world, we look at the U.S. as plus 66%. This is based on the SWS survey. In the Norway, it's plus 16. In France, it's plus 14. Japan is plus 34. Australia is plus 47. And China is minus 33. In other words, Filipinos have a very negative trust rating. Their assessment